So that kicks off a brand new series for us here at On the Coast, and we're calling it Built to Last. Can Canada build its way out of the housing crisis? We're going to take a deep dive into Prime Minister Mark Carney's housing plan, and we'll look at the task before our housing minister and former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson. Today, the CBC's Gurpreet Kambo is with us to help set it all up. Gurpreet, hello there.
Hi, Gloria.
So Mark Carney has been talking a lot about how decades ago, he's talking like after World War II, the federal government invested a lot into housing. So how does that inform his current plan?
So it's really interesting. So he's making some big promises, and he's hearkening back to just after the Second World War for it. So he's saying that during and after the Second World War, the government built tens of thousands of homes, most of which were for returning veterans and their families. So at that time, government agencies themselves oversaw the construction of these new homes. And, you know, there's an element of looking at soldiers returning heroes and having housing ready for them, right? So this is his big promise. As he said in the intro to this segment, he's promising to build, baby, build. That means a lot of different things, but his signature promise is to build 500,000 new homes per year. That's a huge number, more than doubling the pace of construction in this country currently. Here's a clip of the Prime Minister.
Our goal is to double the pace of housing construction to almost 500,000 new homes every single year. Homes you can afford to buy. Homes that are more sustainable and cost less to live in. Homes made right here with Canadian ingenuity, Canadian labor, Canadian products, including mass timber.
As you can hear, as he said, there's a homegrown patriotic element to this as well. Canadian labor, Canadian ingenuity. So it's important to note that the 500,000 number includes both the public and the private sector building homes. The extent that they'll be able to pull this off is an open question. We've heard criticism on this show that Canada currently doesn't have the labor force to pull this off. And this week, we're going to explore many of the questions and criticisms around this plan.
Okay, Gurpreet, what are Mark Carney's overarching goals for addressing housing?
So there's three big planks for this plan. So for building, as I mentioned, the signature promise, 500,000 homes per year. For that, he says he wants the government to get back into the business of building homes. So he also wants, and so that's one of the planks. The second plank, he also wants to make it cheaper for investors to build housing. There's a bunch of different things that fall under that. And then the third thing is that he wants to make it easier for first-time home buyers to get into the housing market. So he's going to cut the GST for first-time home buyers on homes at or under $1 million. So that's the basic outline. The person responsible for implementing it all is no stranger to Vancouverites. Gregor Robertson was the mayor for about a decade until 2017, now the federal housing minister. He joined you in the studio earlier this month. Here's some of what he had to say about the government's big ideas for housing.
Well, it means doubling the amount of housing we build every year. That's going to take, we figure that'll probably take a decade. We have to build more. We're millions of homes behind right now, and that's why we have an affordability crisis. But the government of Canada has to focus on the affordable end of the spectrum. So below market or non-market housing, starting from people who are homeless, supportive housing and transitional housing. Permit it faster. We have to have better financing tools, but right up to kind of the missing middle and building a much bigger supply of housing that Canadians can afford.
So it's worth noting, and I've heard from analysts in researching this segment, that the government hasn't further detailed their housing plans since the election. There's a lot that's uncertain. None of this has really actually begun yet. It's still just a campaign promise. So he's been attacked for this by the opposition as well, that they haven't expanded on their campaign promises yet. They've criticized the Prime Minister for not tabling a spring federal budget, but instead they're going to put forward an economic statement in the fall. Obviously, that would include a lot more of those missing details about housing.
Now, can you explain for us just what it would look like to have the federal government actually work as a developer, potentially building new projects?
Here's how Prime Minister Mark Carney puts it.
The first part of our plan is to create an entirely new entity, Build Canada Homes, a lean, mission-driven organization that will do several things. First, it will act as a developer on new affordable housing projects. It will catalyze a new housing industry. It will provide financing for affordable home builders.
So the Liberal plan, as he said, it'll see him create a new housing corporation, and that's going to be their key to housing affordability called Build Canada Homes. So it'll be a standalone entity rather than being under the CMHC. So a big part of this is that they themselves will act as the developer themselves to build affordable housing at scale, which they've said they're going to make use of public lands to build on. And so in addition to that, they're hoping to, quote, catalyze the housing industry. He uses that word a lot in his campaign speeches. And so part of that is they're going to be providing $25 billion in financing for builders of prefabricated homes in Canada. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. And thirdly, they're going to provide $10 billion in low-cost financing and capital to affordable home builders. And again, most of our information here comes from the campaign ahead of the last election. Since then, we've entered a trade war with the United States. Negotiations are ongoing. Mark Carney's recent nation-building bill, which opens the door to bigger energy projects, has been criticized by some First Nations and leaders and environmentalists. We've also seen government cuts across all departments. So there's a lot that's happened since the election that hasn't been related to housing. We haven't seen a lot of movement on housing since then. So we'll see how big of a priority housing remains and what action they ultimately take.
All right, well, you mentioned prefabricated homes. So how do they factor into all of this?
So that's a huge part of their big plan for the Build Canada Homes organization. So that organization will be placing bulk orders on pre-built and modular housing. So that's also a big part of what the government did in their post-World War II housing plan. Here's what Housing Minister Gregor Robertson said about that.
With materials and manufacturing offsite, if you look at how we build in Canada, roughly 5% of what we build is manufactured offsite construction. And in Sweden right now, it's about 45%. It's the IKEA technology, basically. So we see BC as a leader here in North America on mass timber and using our wood, making our wood into full panels. And those panels get bolted together on site on a construction site.
So instead of homes being built on site, as he said, these are homes built in factories. They're going to be transported in modules and assembled on site. I've heard some people describe it as watching a giant Lego box come together. And so they come together a lot quicker than traditional construction, cheaper too. They're not exposed to the elements as they're being built, which we've heard from some experts can impact more conventional homes. And so these aren't unique or bespoke home designs as some people might like. So that might be a disadvantage to some people, that a lot of these homes are going to end up looking very similar to each other. But as I mentioned, it does mean they'll come together a lot quicker and cheaper. And so the government and Build Canada Homes is going to be providing $25 billion in financing to these prefab home builders.
To catalyze that industry. Okay, it's interesting. Like you talked about Lego. I mean, we certainly have the model of the Vancouver specials here in Vancouver, so we're aware that you can build them faster if you've already got the plans in place. But it's still got to be the private developers who build the lion's share of housing in this country. So what challenges are they facing?
So we're going to hear a lot more of that later in this week. And we've also been talking about this in BC in the past couple of years. Big developers are saying that it's getting harder for their projects, like big apartment buildings and condos, to pencil out financially and to be worthwhile for them. Housing starts have slowed in BC. Last fall, we heard to the lowest ever in a decade. Things like interest rates, inflation, development cost charges, bank financing are all very different than they were 10 years ago. The condo market is lagging. Pre-sales in BC are not keeping pace. And for example, we learned this month that the Curve building in Vancouver is heading into receivership. So the big idea for the federal government in Mark Carney's housing plan is to cut red tape and make it easier for builders and developers to build. So again, quote, catalyzing private capital by reducing the many kinds of fees that there would be and the hoops that they would have to jump through. They're also looking to cut municipal development charges in half for multi-unit housing, and while working with provinces and territories to make sure that municipalities aren't left scrambling for costs. And so they'll be looking to facilitate the conversion of existing structures into affordable housing units. And as I mentioned previously, they want to cut the GST for first-time home buyers under $1 million. One last bit, I know there's a lot of information that I'm providing here, but they're looking to reintroduce a tax incentive that they previously had in the 1970s called the Multiple Unit Rental Building Cost Allowance. So it's essentially saving taxes on building new rentals. The idea, again, is to encourage developers to build at cheaper costs. Last time this was in place, nearly 200,000 units got built at a cost of $2.4 billion in foregone taxes.
Right. Okay. So you're setting up this series that we're going to be bringing more information on this. What are we going to be hearing this week?
So we've talked a lot about what the government's plan is, and throughout the week, we're going to hear more questions and criticism about that. So tomorrow, we'll take on the main question. Can Canada build its way out of the housing crisis? Academics Tom Davidoff and Patrick Condon will join us tomorrow. And, their big difference is they differ academically on the question of whether supply will address the affordability question related to housing. Later in the week, we're going to hear from developer Michael Audain about the challenges developers face. And Brenda Locke, the mayor of Surrey, will be here. Her city is ahead of its housing targets, and she'll join us to talk about where housing goes in different cities. And we want to hear from listeners. So what's your housing story? That's what we're asking on the Coast listeners. We're looking for stories from people about what they're looking for housing, whether that's renters or buyers, whatever your situation might be. We'll read some of those on the air. You can email us with your stories at onthecoast@cbc.ca.
Thank you for setting it up for us, Gurpreet. We're in for an interesting week and lots of interesting conversations.
Thanks, Laura.
That's Gurpreet Kambo. He's a story producer with us here at On the Coast at CBC, laying out the federal government's housing plan. Again, our series is Built to Last. Can Canada build its way out of the housing crisis?